Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of On the Mark TV and radio here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach, and we're going to spend a half an hour today up on what's known as the Quadrangle in Springfield, Massachusetts, the home of the Springfield Museums. Our guests this morning are Larissa Murray, who is the Director of Education Programs, and Maggie North, who's the Art Curator. So we're going to get to go behind the scenes at what's happening. Now, for those of you that don't come to Springfield that often or, have driven by, the Quadrangle, as I knew it as a kid growing up, had a science museum, a museum of art, a museum of history, of local history, and really is a unique museum complex in New England, offering so many different kinds of programs and services. And it is the cultural linchpin of Greater Springfield and Western Massachusetts. So it's really nice to have a chance to go up to the Quadrangle this morning. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be here to speak with you, and thanks for that wonderful introduction.
So I want to know what each of you does at the Springfield Museums, because we'll start with curator. Are you the one that just, in curating, are you the one that decides what paintings go on the wall and what kind of exhibits get put together? And are you the one that actually puts them up and into the display cases?
Thank you. Great question. Yes, so I have the wonderful pleasure of doing a lot of behind the scenes planning for our exhibitions that go on view, as well as our permanent collections at the art museums at the Springfield Museums. And we have two art museums. We have the George Walter Vincent Smith Art Museum, which is a wonderful collection of work that was put together by a 19th century collector, and features American paintings, Japanese and Chinese decorative arts, as well as Islamic arts, plaster casts, and more. And we also have a D'Amour Museum of Fine Arts, which features several special exhibitions, as well as American and European fine art. So we have a lot in terms of the variety of our collections. And as the curator of art, I research and help to interpret the works of art that we put on view, as well as selecting the pieces along with my colleagues. Usually there's a conversation amongst the education departments, the marketing departments, and with our other installation staff and our director at the art museums about what will be put on view and when. But it really is a pleasure to work with this treasure trove of objects and also the amazing people that are at the Springfield Museums. And as the curator of art, I occasionally also get to work with pieces at our Amazing World of Dr. Seuss Museum. That's the newest museum at the Springfield Museums, which opened in 2017. I think Larissa will agree with me. It's hard to believe it's been open for 5 years, but it's become a real staple and a magnet for families and literacy learning in the Valley. So we're really pleased to have it. And of course, because Dr. Seuss was an illustrator, we have works of art at that museum as well.
With all of this paintings and sculptures and decorative arts, this is probably a terrible question to ask, but is there one or two that is your favorite? They would say, you can put up whatever you want this week. Is there one or two that are really special to you?
Oh my gosh, I get that question all the time, and it is so hard to answer because I think I have a favorite piece in every single gallery, if not a few favorite pieces in every single gallery. But there are a few works of art that are really special to me. I think many visitors share with me an affinity for our Georgia O'Keeffe painting, which was purchased in the very early days of the D'Amour Museum of Fine Arts, which opened in 1933. So when the piece was brought into the collection in the 1930s, it was contemporary art. It was brand new. And it's a wonderful example of Georgia O'Keeffe's New Mexico landscapes. I'm particularly interested in modern and contemporary art, so that's sort of my field of study. And I also am a huge fan of one of the portraits that's on view in our contemporary gallery. We have a number that are fantastic, but one in particular by the Puerto Rican artist Arnaldo Roche Rebel is absolutely wonderful. It's actually encaustic, so it's textural and colorful and large, and depicts the artist in a way in which acknowledges his history as an artist who's working in Puerto Rico but living in the United States, and bringing those elements of his cultural heritage together. So those are the two that I'll bring up for now, but there are so many other fantastic pieces.
Of all the, I mean, you can't put every piece of art that the museum owns on exhibit at the same time. So I know that you have works in storage. How do you protect these works of art from climate and aging, and obviously security things? Are the museum's storage areas climate controlled, or do you store things off property in a place that is climate controlled?
Absolutely. We follow the best practices in museum standards around conservation. We're an accredited institution with the American Alliance of Museums. So our storage areas are climate controlled. We pay attention to temperature, humidity, the way in which works of art are housed. And we have a fantastic collections management staff, our registrar and our assistant registrar, who keep track of everything in terms of paperwork, but also digitally. And we have a wonderful installation staff that also helps to make sure that when pieces are installed, they're installed in a way that protects the work of art. Sometimes we will have a climate controlled case within a climate controlled gallery, if that's what needs to be done in order to protect the work of art. Many museums have lots of works on paper in their collection, and works on paper are light sensitive. If you've ever left a print hanging on your wall in view of sunlight for a long time, you might notice that it could start to fade or discolor over time. We rotate our works on paper, so they're not always on view, in order to preserve them for the long term. And certainly our goal is to be a safe keeper of history, and to make sure that the priceless pieces in our collection are really available for generations to come. The museums have been around since the 19th century, and we hope to be around for many more hundreds of years.
Do you ever go shopping for a painting? Like there'd be an artist who might be a big name right now, and do museums go out and purchase the piece of art, thinking, well, that's going to be a masterpiece in 30 years, or are the art generally given or donated to a museum?
Art is added to the collection through acquisition occasionally. At the moment, we're not doing a lot of purchasing, but certainly that's something that museums are looking to do, and works can come in through purchase or through acquisition via donation. And I think what you nodded to there is a really important factor, is sort of predicting what will be important to the story of our history and to the story of Springfield for many years to come. That's always a challenge of the curator and the museum staff. So certainly it's something that we think about. And right at the moment, we, along with many museums, are really thinking about ways in which we can diversify our collections. So that will be an initiative going forward, I think, for many years.
So we're talking about all this wonderful resources and collections, and this education program that the museums has. Is it education for adults, education for people that are really interested in the arts, education for children? How do you put together a program like that?
It's actually education for everyone. That's the best part of what we get to do here at the Springfield Museums, especially those in my department, in the education department, is that we work within all 5 of the museums. So not just the 2 art museums, but also science, history, and Dr. Seuss. And so our programming seeks to have something for everyone, whether you're a toddler, around the galleries of the Dr. Seuss Museum, or you're an adult kind of that looks for continuing education opportunities through our museum school or through our weekly lecture series. So we have a little bit of everything for everyone, we hope. And that's what my department seeks to do, is to put on special programming. Actually, we work with Maggie in the art museums quite often when we have special exhibits, and create lectures and special day-long events that highlight those exhibits. We also welcome school groups here on a daily basis for in-person and now virtual field trips. We have drop-in spaces where whenever you visit, you can go down to the Cat's Corner in the Dr. Seuss Museum. You can stop by the Smithsonian Spark Lab in the Science Museum and work on something innovative and try to make your own invention to clean up the ocean or something like that. So we have a little bit of everything for everyone.
Well, you mentioned school groups, and school vacation is upon us. Do you have any special programs for this February vacation week for the public schools and for the ones coming up in April?
We do. Actually, our 3 school vacation weeks in December, February, and April tend to be our highest weeks of visitation every year. We see a lot of people during the summer, but we have that extreme concentration of visitors over the school vacation week. So we do add specialized programming to make sure that we have a lot going on. We tie into our special exhibits that are on view. So that's under the Arctic in the Science Museum. And Maggie will just be opening a great show in a couple weeks about rock and roll photography. So maybe something for children, parents, and grandparents with special exhibits. But we also create a theme every week. And coming up in February, which is the 21st through the 25th, Monday through Friday are the special programming days. It's magic makers and storytellers. So we have a magician here every day. We have some authors stopping by to visit and give book talks. We have a local author fair. We have Ochre Dance Company coming in to do some performances. So we add a lot extra. There's always something to do here, but we add even more those weeks.
And how can people find out about overall what's happening at the Springfield museums?
A few different ways. So we do still have traditional print pieces that we mail to our mailing list, but of course we have a website full of events, breaks it down by the day, what performances or lectures or hands-on activities are happening. And then also we try to share that through our social media channels as well, especially on Facebook and Instagram.
And let's give them that. The website is springfieldmuseums.org, right?
Correct.
And that's open 24/7 along with the social. I see your stuff on Facebook.
Oh, good. Yes, that is always there. And we, in a couple more weeks, hopefully we'll add on what's happening during April school vacation week. You mentioned April as well, so we'll have special days of programming over that week too, which is Museums Rock. So not only are the museums a fun place to be, but we're also going to talk about geology too. So rocks.
Oh, okay, yeah. Now, I mean, people are talking now about what to do with their kids during the summer for the long break, and I mean, whether they're going to sleepaway camps or day camps and stuff. But the museums have always had programs throughout the year and in the summer for kids of all ages.
Yeah, so we have about 50 days of specialized programming every year when you think about the weekend program, school vacation weeks, and then over the 6 weeks in summer, July and August. Those are what we consider public programs. So like school vacation week, these days where we have extra performances and hands-on activities. We also do have a museum school at the Springfield Museums that is over 100 years old, founded in 1918. They started offering lessons for adults and for children. So that kind of school or sort of camp-like environment continues to this day. So during the month of July and maybe early August, we'll have a few classes that take place over the day, maybe a week long, where children can dive in depth into science, into art, into technology. I don't have the full lineup yet. It's, happy Groundhog Day. It's only February, but in the next couple of months, hopefully we'll have the whole lineup of what we're offering this summer.
Yeah, but I remember as a kid going to the museums to take a painting class on a Saturday morning, and that was something that was traditional that, a lot of people did. They went to the museums, and they ended up, because the library was part of the museums at that point, you often went and heard a story somewhere. But the quadrangle was a weekend destination for a class and an exhibit and all of that. So that's remained over the years.
Most certainly. We have classes coming up this weekend. I know it's for adults, but mosaics class this weekend. There's a paintings class taking plays down in the studios right now. So that continues. And, we do still offer painting and art experiences for children. We've also added in like robotic coding and things like that with the computer sciences. There are classes for little ones up to teenagers that take place, especially in the summer, but then we do offer the weekends here and there.
Okay, we're going to take a very quick break to acknowledge the underwriters that make programming like this on the Mark possible here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. And we'll be back more to talk about what's going on at the Springfield Museums. If you've missed a part of today's program, or you want to watch it again or share it with your friends, you can find it archived on YouTube under WSKB Community Radio. So be sure to share it. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll return after these messages.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Westfield Bank. For more than 160 years, Westfield Bank has been an important community presence and commercial leader in the Pioneer Valley. With convenient full banking services in Westfield, West Springfield, East Longmeadow, Agawam, Feeding Hills, Springfield, Southwick, as well as Enfield and Granby, Connecticut. Visit us on the web at westfieldbank.org.
Underwriting for Community Radio on WSKB is brought to you in part by Rockies. Over 30 convenient locations throughout Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Florida. One of the nation's largest ACE dealers. Expertise and great product selection in paint, hardware, lawn and garden. That's Rockies, rock solid service since 1926. On the web at rockies.com.
Listen to me, Michael Buster McMahon, Mondays 8 to 10 a.m. to learn the stories behind your favorite songs. Or don't. I'm not the boss of you.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB. Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to On the Mark, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer this morning, and we are at the Springfield Museums chatting with Larissa Murray, who's the education director, and Maggie North, who is the art curator. And there's a lot going on February vacation week at the Springfield Museums, which are downtown in Springfield. For those of you that have not been, you can get information on all the programs, both educational and exhibits, at their website, springfieldmuseums.org. And if you've never been to the Springfield Museums, it's the linchpin in the cultural fabric of Greater Springfield, so you really must make a trip. Some of us that grew up in Springfield have been going to the museum since we were kids. And there's always something there, whether it's the Science Museum or the Springfield History Museum. And when you go through that museum and you realize all the great things that the world has these days that started it in Springfield, it's kind of amazing. And when were the Springfield Museums founded?
The museums were founded in the 1850s. So we go back quite a ways. 1857, I believe. Maggie, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
And
That's correct.
I know that the George Walter Vincent Smith Museum was a collection of an individual or a family's art. What about the Springfield, the Demore Museum? Was that something that started as a collection that was donated by a Springfield family of the times and then built upon? Or did somebody say, let's have an art museum?
The Demore Museum of Fine Arts is an interesting case because the idea for the museum came to be before the collection was installed in the museum. So in 1933, this museum opened. It had been supported by generous philanthropists in the area, especially the Grays, who initially contributed funds to construct the museum building. But when it opened, many of the pieces that were on view were loans because the museum had not yet begun to purchase works of art for the collection. So the collection has grown and grown and grown over the years and over the decades. And really it's evolved into one of the best collections of fine art that you can see in Massachusetts. And I think really in the Northeast, especially for the size of the museum. So it's ever evolving, it continues to evolve, but a very different case of a museum founding than, as you said, the George Walter Vincent Smith Art Museum, which really started with the collection rather than the building.
And the Science Museum, when did that come to be? Was that part of the original plan, or because that building looks sort of like the D'Amour Museum, were they constructed and thought about around the same time?
What's interesting is that the Science Museum was actually constructed in the late 19th century, and it originally had a very different facade than the one that you see now. When the D'Amour Museum of Fine Arts was built in the 30s, there was a decision to basically create a makeover for the Springfield Science Museum. For those who have been to the Springfield museums, you know that the D'Amour Museum of Fine Arts and the Science Museum are located directly across from one another. So there was a desire to have the visual look of the exterior of the museums coincide and speak to each other. So both have these Art Deco facades, but in fact, the Springfield Science Museum is older.
And then the Museum of Springfield History, the Wood Museum, that's the newest museum on the complex.
Sort of, depending on how you define the question. That the newest museum to open is the Dr. Seuss, The Amazing World of Dr. Seuss Museum, which we opened in 2017. However, that was in a building that dates back to the 1920s, when it was originally the Connecticut Valley Historical Society and then the museum. You're right that the Wood Museum of Springfield History across from the Quadrangle on Edward Street is kind of the newest building. There's an interior piece that was existing that belonged to the phone company, and then they built that large atrium that, SIS Hall, as we know it, onto that building, which opened in 2009. So kind of a trick question.
Yeah. If somebody from the art world, let's say on the West Coast or in Europe, were to talk about the Springfield museums, is there one or two works of art that are world renowned that would make an art person want to come specifically to Springfield?
We have a number of works of art in our collection that really are world renowned. We have works by Monet and other famous impressionists. Many people ask to see our Monet Haystacks painting when they come in the door. Certainly we have works by important 19th century French artists such as Bouguereau. And we have a number of important Dutch works of art as well. We have a fantastic painting, self-portrait by Ferdinand Bol, which is a 17th century piece. This artist was a student of Rembrandt, and so that's a piece that gets requested for loan extremely often. We also have representations of famous American artists and artworks, including local artists such as Erastus Salisbury Field, who was an itinerant portrait artist whose lifetime really spanned the 1800s and did some important work in this area. Of course, important modernists, like I mentioned, Georgia O'Keeffe, George Bellows, so many others. And we have really excellent examples of Chinese and Japanese decorative arts that people come from around the country and really around the world to see in our George Walter Vincent Smith Art Museum. So it's hard to pick just one. Really, there are some outstanding pieces at the Springfield museums, and it's truly a gem. We're so lucky to be able to share these works of art with our community.
Yeah, we really are very lucky, and it's kind of in my view, it's sort of a generalist museum because there's a lot of different things. It's not specifically works by Norman Rockwell that you would drive to the Berkshires to see, or works that were created in the last 10 years that you might go to Massmoka to see. But this is really kind of representative of a lot of eras and styles. Let's talk about the Science Museum. What are some of the highlights of the Science Museum these days?
I would have to say our Smithsonian Spark Lab, which we are just so thrilled to have. It's been open about 2 years now. Not a very normal 2 years, but we have kept that hands-on activity going and that station running. It's a unique opportunity through our Smithsonian affiliation to house one of their Spark Labs, which is all based on innovation and invention about trying to solve problems and empower children that they can figure out the answers. They can discover, scientific ways to move forward, and just it's at the same time also hands-on play. And one of the things that the Science Museum never had up until early 2020 when we opened this was there was not a hands-on station that you could visit anytime you came to the museum. We had special programs, obviously field trips, but you couldn't just go to this spot every single time and do something hands-on while you were visiting that particular museum. So to open up the Spark Lab was a huge victory for us, that we now have that to offer every single day to every visitor who comes through the door. We're also working on an International Space Station exhibit, which we have a piece of that. The vestibule has already opened. We have a spacesuit on view there, and much more to come in the next few months. And then we have a historic planetarium that is going through a renovation, and hopefully we'll finish that within the coming year. So we have a lot of exciting things happening in the Science Museum, not related to the usual dinosaurs and live animals, which of course are mainstays of everyone's visit, but we're adding more on the hands-on and technological front.
Well, I just remember the planetarium from school trips. That was just like the coolest thing in the world. And I don't know if my mind is jaded because school trips were so long in my past, but I've been to other planetariums, and that's just kind of a fun thing. And I can't wait for that to be around in Springfield again.
Yeah, we are so excited about that. We have this fantastic star ball, which remains in the planetarium, and now we're just adding a few new layers to that to continue to offer educational experiences to our visitors. So that's been a project that we're thrilled that's happening.
We only have a couple of minutes left, so can we do a quick rundown of some of the exhibitry that you would recommend people visit during the spring?
Absolutely. So I can start off with the art museums, where we have one special exhibition that's open now through February 27th, and that's called The Body Adorned, The Artistry and Legacy of the Ancient Americas. This exhibition consists of works of art that are on loan to the Springfield Museums from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. They are examples of ancient American pectorals, nose rings, ear rods, and textiles that were created for the practice of adorning the body in ancient indigenous cultures of Central and South America. And a few of these are paired with modern works of art. We also have hands-on stations within that gallery space where visitors can come to, for example, touch a 3D printed replica of an Aztec stamp that's on view, or create their own Chanel stem adornment piece, or create a weaving. And also at the art museums, not opening until February 12th, but on view through the spring, through May 1st, we have an excellent exhibition of concert photography coming to the Springfield Museums. This is Front Row Center, Icons of Rock, Blues, and Soul, which it features over 70 black and white photographs by a photographer named Larry Holst, who really documented modern American music from the 1970s through the 1990s.
So the great reasons to come to the Springfield Museums, and education programs for Vacation Week. It's all out there at springfieldmuseums.org or on Facebook. And are you guys on Instagram and some of the other social media networks too?
We sure are.
Okay. Well, we're out of time, and I want to thank you for joining us this morning. A really great opportunity to chat with Larissa Murray, the education director, and Maggie North, who's the art curator for the Springfield Museums in downtown Springfield. So if you're wandering around Springfield and you want a great experience, whether it's art or science, you want to head to the museums. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, you'll have to come back again as we get towards the summer, and we'll talk about what's going on in the summer. Maybe when the weather gets nicer, we can come out and do a show from the quadrangle.
Yes,
would love
please
that.
do a field trip. Come on out and see us. We have so much to show you.
Yeah, I'd come out for a field trip and spend the entire day there. So I'll try to get there this spring. We're going to take a break and we'll be back with more On the Mark on Westville Community Programming Channel 15 or 89.5 FM WSKB. If you've missed a part of today's program or want to catch it again, it's archived on YouTube on WSKB Community Radio. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll be right back.
Underwriting support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Greater Westfield Chamber of Commerce, the voice of business for the Greater Westfield communities. Informing, educating, advocating, the Chamber provides opportunities for members to make meaningful connections on local, regional, and state levels. For more information on the Chamber's many events, workshops, and programs, as well as the benefits of membership, visit westfieldbiz.org. The Chamber focuses on the most important economy, yours.
Hi, this is Harry Rock, host of Rock on Westfield every fourth Wednesday at 8 a.m. Tune in for my view of this place I call home.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB. Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to On the Mark, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer today. We're broadcasting from Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, Southwick Community Programming Channel 15 as well, and 89.5 FM WSKB. Our next guest has brought the art of cocktails to a broad national and international audience. J.M. Hirsch, who's a former food writer before joining Milk Street, which many of you may watch on public television or catch on YouTube. And I picked up, was coasting through YouTube at one point and watched one of his features called Cocktail Archaeology, where you go back and you look at a beverage that was crafted 100 years ago and how can you make it better and stronger. And although I don't come from a household that really drinks cocktails that much, I've learned a lot about the art of cocktail making. And so J.M. Hirsch, it's really nice to meet you. And you've got a new book out and working on another one, and your book is about cocktails. And you need to turn your volume up.
There we go. Sorry.
There we go.
You would think I'd have the knack for this by this point in the pandemic, right? Well, thank you very much for having me. And yes, I am a bit of a cocktail guy. In fact, I was at my doctor's this morning and he said to me, "Do you want me to help you with that?" And I said, "No, I don't think it's a problem. I call it a career." So let's see.
How did you, I mean, I know that I read a little bit on your background and that you were doing a lot of cookbooks and food editing. How did you get into the food journalism to start?
Well, it was not a traditional route, not necessarily a route actually that I would recommend for most people either. But I actually was studying philosophy. I was planning to go into academia, and I didn't. I decided I didn't actually enjoy teaching, and I was overseas at the time. I came home and tried to figure out what to do with my life, and I was always a good writer, and I ended up at the Associated Press. This was back in 96, I guess. And so I started out covering crime, particularly involving children. And I had always, however, been a food person, and I've always enjoyed kind of exploring the world through food. And I happened to be in kind of the right place at the right time in terms of food journalism, because it was right around that time, probably, the late 90s, that as a country, and certainly as media outlets, we started to take the connection between food and politics and equity and the environment and all these other issues, we started taking very seriously and see the interconnectedness of it all. And so I was in a very good place to be interested in food writing at that time, because suddenly there was a, forgive the pun, hunger for that and in our media landscape. And so I became the AP's national food writer. The the early 2000s, I believe. And not too many years after that, I became the national food editor for AP, and that's a position I kept until I left AP, which would have been 2016, I guess. And that's when Chris Kimball, the founder of Milk Street, recruited me to come run Milk Street with him. And I've been there ever since. So it was a bit of an unexpected route. Like I say, I expected to be in academia, but didn't really enjoy it. So here I am.
Well, I guess when it is academic to a point when you're writing about crafting a recipe, and you got to make sure that instead of having the footnotes, that all the ingredients are tested and all of that. But it's certainly a lot more fun than writing a thesis.
Absolutely, it's also a lot more satisfying than Plato. But we. Food journalism, it's both at Milk Street and at the Associated Press, encompasses so much. It really is such a wonderful lens to see community and culture and history. I was recently in Liberia for Milk Street, and I traveled probably about once a month to a different part of the world for research. And I was in Liberia, and it was absolutely fascinating, the history behind something as simple as banana bread. We know that a lot of the slaves in the American South were brought over from West Africa. Well, they brought a lot of their culinary traditions with them, and those became traditions embedded in the American South. When Liberia was created, and now former slaves were sent back to West Africa, it was a very misguided and pretty horrible situation all around. But many were sent back to West Africa. They brought those culinary traditions with them again. And so these are traditions that had started in West Africa, came to the American South, evolved in the American South, and then were brought back to West Africa, where they've continued to evolve. And I mean, this is a fascinating part of our history in the United States, but also of West African history. And it brings in, some of the kind of the worst parts of our country, and also some of the best parts of our country and our history. And all of that through food. And that's why I find food such a fascinating lens through which to see culture and history and politics. And then the recipes, of course, that's kind of the fun part, really. And, we've always taken the recipe development part of that very seriously at Milk Street. We test everything kind of obsessively and to make sure it will work when you get it home. But yeah, it is an academic pursuit in many ways. And being a journalist, I think it's the best way to approach it, because, as a journalist, I always like to think of it as we know nothing. I always enter every situation as though I'm the least educated and least informed person in the room, because that's how I can best understand what it is I'm reporting on and understanding. And I don't, you can't be afraid to ask stupid questions. And this is true whether you're covering politics or you're covering food. And that's how you learn. And so it is, you're right, it is a very academic pursuit.
Well,
and very satisfying.
Yeah. How did you pivot into the world of cocktails? Because, your book and your cocktail archaeology, your little segments on Milk Street, and some of the other segments you do where you recreate and simplify cocktails for various occasions, that's an art form within the food world is that indigenous to us? Are cocktails equal around the world? I have worked around the world, and I spent a lot of time working in Israel, where only the tourists went for cocktails and went to the finer restaurants. People on the street drank something else, and
right.
I find here in Western New England, where you can go to a really wonderful farm-to-table restaurant And that Bloody Mary is made with tomato juice out of a can because they don't take the time to craft the cocktail as well as they craft the meal. Or you go to a bar and have a really, really terrific cocktail that just sends you over the moon, and they serve it with a bowl of Chex Mix or something. And we don't seem to have around here the pursuit of high quality of both at the same time.
Well, so I am, this is where I become very unpopular. I am not a big fan of the restaurant scene in our chosen part of the world. Whenever I'm asked where I like to go out to eat, I live in New Hampshire, by the way. Whenever I'm asked where I like to go out to eat, I always say New York or London, which is ever so slightly pretentious, but also relatively true. New Hampshire in particular is just a desert when it comes to great restaurants. Portland, Maine has a lot going on. Boston has a little bit, but not as much as I think it should. But anyway, to your point, though, the United States does have probably the richest history in terms of cocktail culture. And although certainly, Paris and London have been going strong for an awful long time as well. But it was a culture that particularly thrived and began in the United States very much. These days, though, when you look at the list of the top 50 bars in the world, which I tend to obsess over, the United States actually only has a handful on the list, and Asia is one of the most up and coming regions for great bars, as of course is London, and you can get great cocktails all over the world now. And I came into it, it was just kind of a weird curiosity. I was always a wine drinker, and then I started getting into bourbon and rye. And then, of course, once you're going down that path, you start making old fashions and Manhattans. And I, just started playing around, and and I was I really never intended to get so fully into the cocktail world. I had started writing down my recipes, and one day, I've done conventional cookbooks in the past, for meals, and I didn't think I would ever write another cookbook. I was kind of done with that process for myself. I oversee it for Milk Street, but and then, so I realized I had 20 or 30 recipes that I really liked, that I thought were good. And one day I had this brilliant idea that, maybe I'll just self-publish it just for fun, to give it to friends. And and then one thing led to another. And I decided, well, if I'm going to put in the effort, I might as well publish it for real. And I do, I have the advantage of knowing an awful lot of people in the publishing world. So it wasn't too onerous a task to line up a publisher, and I'm thrilled to work with Little Brown on my books. And we put it together, and it came out actually a year ago. Shake, Strain, Done. And I really enjoyed it because for me and for Milk Street as well, accessibility is everything. And so when there are so many amazing cocktail books on the market, but they tend to be written in a language and for people who have a certain level of expertise, and a recipe that calls for 12 sub recipes in order to just make one cocktail, that's kind of ridiculous to me. So I try to simplify. It's what we do at Milk Street, and it's what I do in my cocktails. I try to simplify to make them accessible, and to use a language that I call it use a language that you can taste. And so every cocktail in my book, for example, has a description of kind of key terms, the primary flavor profile. Is it sour? Is it sweet? Is it refreshing? Is it warm? And use that, because if you may not, if you're not really deep into cocktails, then you may look at a list of ingredients and have no idea what it's going to taste like. But if you look at a list of, bitter and sweet and sour, well, you obviously have a very good sense of what that cocktail is going to taste like and whether you might like it. And so, I tried to craft a book that, was kind of an everyman approach to great cocktails, because I don't think, And you should have to be an expert in order to make a great cocktail at home.
But in looking at your book and in watching your videos and things, you don't need a lot of supplies. You don't need a huge liquor cabinet with a million different choices of vodkas or whatever.
Right.
Your stuff is so simple, and little things like, rather than spending the time to make a sugar syrup, you can buy agave syrup
Yeah.
right off the shelf of a supermarket. And I think that some of the ideas that you're putting out there elevate what and make a cocktail. It's simple to make if you just think it through at the beginning, and you can have a great cocktail and have a great meal and not have to sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Cocktails don't have to be complicated to be good. And, I am thrilled to, go to a really good bar and pay a premium for an excellently crafted cocktail. A lot of times, though, they're using techniques and ingredients that just aren't accessible at home. And, they'll make a 12-month infusion of something. And it's like, well, that's nice, but I'm not going to do that to have a drink at the end of the day. And so it was important to me to focus on the ingredients and the techniques that elevate a home cocktail, but don't make it difficult, that keep it accessible. There are simple tricks that you can do. For example, infusions. A lot of great bars will use infused liquors, and so, for example, maybe vanilla being infused vodka or tequila or something like that. And the way they do it is very nuanced and wonderful. They may steep these ingredients in the liquor for, say, 3 months or 3 weeks or whatever. That's just not practical at home when you just, at the end of the day, you decide you want to drink. And so I use a blender to do what I call a speed infusion. It does it in about 30 seconds and you strain it out and you're good to go. These are things that I think elevate the home cocktail, but yet still keep it in the kind of zone of accessibility.
Well, I grew up in a house where vodka was made in the cellar, and it was, from the old country in Russia, and they did not really infuse their vodkas, but until right before they served it. But I remember my grandfather the vodka was always stored in the freezer in a block of ice, and then he would take these hot chili peppers and slice them up and put them in the vodka before he drank it, and then to go into the liquor store and see Stoli and these other flavored vodkas, the Russians would walk away from them, and supposedly they were imported from Russia. But in my travels around the globe for work as a journalist, I found that eating where the locals ate and going to the off the beaten places and learning what local people ate and drank was the best way to get to know people.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I do, every month. I tend to travel at least a week out of every month. And the best meals and the best learning occurs around the table with locals. When I travel, I try to cook with both professional and home cooks. And, I was in the Middle East a week and a half ago. And, I was sitting in the desert underneath a camel, sharing tea with a group of Bedouin camel racers. I mean, it's an amazing experience. And I'm honored that they're willing to not just share their tea with me, but to share their culture and their time and their community with me. And to me, that's, again, it goes back to the beauty of food. It really can unite us, and it can teach us an awful lot and a lot about more than just what's on the plate.
You're right about uniting people. When I I worked in Israel right after the Gulf War, and I'm a theater reporter by trade and an arts reporter, and not the best of cooks. I do read, I watch food shows and things like that, but I kind of people that eat at my house risk their lives if I'm in the kitchen cooking. But in Israel, people took me out to show me they were very proud of local things. I had never seen a fig tree before, and I grew up, and had traveled. Never pulled a fig off of a tree, and in Israel they grow like weeds, and I had never seen almonds on a tree. I mean, it's or olive oil being pressed, and I spent a lot of my free time while everybody else was soaking up the sun on the beaches and stuff like that. I was in the middle of nowhere, following locals around and learning food techniques. And some of the food things and ideas that I brought back and came home with or traveled to other parts of the globe in my work have become part of my personal repertoire of things. I would assume it's the same for you, especially having just come back from Jordan. Where are some of the other places that you've traveled in the last year or so?
Well, this year has been challenging.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to get vaccinated very early, so I was able to resume travel for work last February, I believe. And I started out in Italy, which we go to periodically for Milk Street, just because Italian food is so popular in the United States. Then I went to Mexico City and Liberia. I know I'm missing a country in there. I was in Crete. I was in Morocco recently and Jordan. I was supposed to be going to Thailand next month, but unfortunately they've reinstituted quarantine, so I won't be able to do that. And it's not practical for me to go someplace where I have to sit in a hotel for 14 days. And so I'll probably be going to Pakistan, and then Colombia is after that, and I'm not sure. Of course, it's so hard to plan these days because everything changes by the minute. And I mean, it was just yesterday that Thailand reinstituted its quarantine policy, so I can't blame them, but it makes my job challenging.
And it must, as a journalist, it must have made it difficult. I mean, I was able to come into the studio throughout the pandemic, but nobody else was allowed to be in the studio. We all went to Zoom. I did a lot of radio from home. It was something I'd never done before. There you are doing your cocktails from your kitchen. That's a real pivot for somebody who's used to traveling.
It was. I mean, I was in Ethiopia when word of the pandemic started coming out, and it was a bit of a culture shock, because in the 2 weeks that I was in Ethiopia, all of a sudden, on my way to Ethiopia, there was, nothing going on, didn't see any signs of anything. On my way home from Ethiopia, everybody in the airport was wearing masks, and I was like, wow, they're taking this seriously, which, at the time, it was obviously very naive, but it didn't seem real at that point yet. And then a few weeks later, I was in London, and that's when we realized how real it was. And I came home from London just a couple of days before the lockdown in the United States, and everything shut down. I was supposed to go to China actually a few weeks later, but that obviously didn't happen. And it was an adjustment. I love working from home. I've always worked from home for the most part, except for when I'm traveling. Milk Street has an office in Boston where our culinary and art teams work, as well as our e-commerce. But a lot of my team is remote anyway. So that part wasn't an adjustment, but the part that was figuring out, how do we travel, which was very challenging. We did do some of what I call virtual travel to Italy, and it was a nightmare to coordinate. But the way it worked is I have my dedicated photographer is based in Rome. And so he had, because he's press, he had some liberty of movement at the time in Italy. And so he was able to go to locations that I would have normally gone with him. And he was able to, basically we hired an assistant, and that assistant would hold up a cell phone with me on FaceTime. And, I would walk around the farm and see the food production and see the cook and, quote, stand next to the cook as he or she worked and ask questions and learn. And I was able to do stories on the Amalfi Coast and in Venice this way, which kind of kept things moving. It was not the same as being there, and hard to taste the food over FaceTime, but it was making the best of a really challenging situation. So I was very relieved when travel opened up for me again in February.
So you had said prior to the program that you've got this one book out right now about cocktails, and that you're working on another one. What's the next book about?
So it's actually kind of connected to cocktail archaeology, which is just a web series that I do sporadically when I have time for Milk Street. And I bought I don't know, probably 20 different old cocktail books, going back, 150 years, some of these things. And they have some really creative, some awful recipes in them too, but some good ones and some creative ones. And I decided to kind of dig through them and see what was interesting and what could be improved and kind of modernized. The tastes back then were sometimes a little skewed. And so I had bought all these books, and I was researching old cocktails. And then I got the idea of doing another cookbook, another cocktail book called Pour Me Another. And it builds again on this idea of using language that we can taste. And so it uses these same 11 qualities to describe each cocktail, so that that a certain cocktail is warm and sweet and a little bit bitter, or something like that. And so exactly what's in the glass before you ever go to the liquor cabinet. But I decided to make this one where it's kind of like a choose your own adventure cocktail book. So every cocktail, in addition to being described in these terms that kind of help you understand what it's going to taste like, it also at the bottom gives you suggestions of what else you should try next, which is cocktails that have similar flavor profiles. And so there's 250 recipes in the book. Most, if not all, not quite all, most of them are based on kind of these historic cocktails that have been around for a long time, many of them needing to be resuscitated and revived for modern sensibilities. And the idea is that you can use what you like in order to discover things you never knew you would like. And so my favorite example of this is if you are a whiskey drinker, you might drink an old fashioned, which is one of my favorite cocktails, but you might not consider yourself to be a gin drinker, because gin and bourbon, seem like very opposite ends of a liquor spectrum. But actually, there are different ways to mix gin that is true to the gin, lets the gin shine through, but presents the gin in a way that kind of drinks a bit like a bourbon cocktail. And there's a bijou is one of the cocktails I'm thinking about. And it presents like a cross between an old fashioned and a Manhattan, but it's a gin-based cocktail. And so I loved this idea that you could use something that and are comfortable with, and use that to kind of jump off and explore other things. So if you try the old fashioned, and then you try the bijou, and then you go from the bijou to try something else, to me, it's all about accessibility. And unless you are a real cocktail aficionado and you spend a lot of time playing around with them, you don't necessarily know what other cocktails you like. I think a lot of people just go into the bar, they order what they always order, and they stick with it because they don't know what something else is going to taste like. They don't know what it's going to, whether they're going to like it. And so I liked the idea of building a book around this kind of choose your own adventure concept that, it's going to guide you, starting with what guide you through things that you should try, because you probably will like them, even though they don't on paper sound like the sort of drink that you normally consume.
Well, when will the new book be out?
I just turned in the manuscript about a month ago, so it'll be out next October.
Okay. We're just about out of time. So if people want to learn more about your books or watch you on Milk Street, how do they find out more about J.M. Hirsch?
Well, probably the best way, the place I'm most active on is Instagram. It's JM_Hirsch, HIRSCH. And that's where I'm most active. Amazon obviously has my book, but if you go to Instagram, if you want a signed copy, up in the links, there's a great local bookstore here in Concord, New Hampshire called Gibson's, and they are a wonderful independent shop, and they have signed copies. And there's a link on my bio on Instagram for that. And I'm on Milk Street Television, and 177milkstreet.com is where all things Milk Street live. Our TV show, our radio show, our books, our recipes, all that stuff.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I look forward
thank you for having me.
Many happy drinks and happy food for you in 2022.
Sounds good. Have a great holiday.
You too. We've been chatting with J.M. Hirsch from Milk Street. Catch his books or go to YouTube and watch some of his videos, especially Cocktail Archaeology. And there's another one where he and his partner sample certain canned beverages that are out and about, and it's always great for a laugh. And that wraps up another edition of On the Mark here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, 89.5 FM WSKB. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll see you next week with another edition of On the Mark.
Did you just hear what I just heard? That noise don't come from no ordinary bird. It may be just a cricket or a critter in the trees. It's giving me the jitters and the joints around my knees. I think I see a jijik and it's fuzzy and it's furry. I haven't got a brain, but I think I ought to worry. I haven't got a heart, but I feel a palpitation. As monarch of the forest, I don't like this situation. You gonna stand around and let it fill us full of horror? I'd like to roar 'em down. But I think I lost my roarer. Great. It's a who's this? It's a who's this? It's a what's this? It's a what's this? Who's that? Who's there? Who's where? Beware! Who's that hiding in the treetop? It's that rascal, the jitterbug. If you catch him buzzing around you, keep away from the jitterbug. Oh, the bees in the breeze and the bats in the trees have a terrible, horrible buzz. But the bees in the breeze and the bats in the trees couldn't do what the jitterbug does. So just be careful of that rascal. Keep away from the jitterbug. The jitterbug. Oh, the jitter. Oh, the bug. Oh, the jitterbug. Do-I, 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 do-I. I'm a twitter in the throes. The critters got me dancing on 1,000 toes. There she blows. There she goes. Who's that hiding in the treetops? It's that rascal. Jitterbug, jitterbug. Should you catch him buzzing round you, keep away from the jitterbug, jitterbug, jitterbug. Oh, the bees in the breeze and the bats in the trees have a terrible, horrible buzz. But the bees in the breeze and the bats in the trees couldn't do what the jitterbug does. What the jitterbug do what the jitterbug does. So be careful of that rascal. Keep away from the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees and the bats and the fleas all agree to stay away from that old jay, the jitterbug. Look out for that bug.